Hi there, fifth wheel owners. Today on your 2019 CrossRoads Redwood, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install eTrailer's bearing kit for 13-inch rotors with an 8 and 6.5 bolt pattern. We just got done installing a disc brake setup on our trailer here, and this is a great opportunity to replace your bearings. You're going to have to remove your old ones to install the new disc brake kit. Now in this particular case, our bearings were the same number, so we could have potentially reused them, but it's not really recommended to reuse your old bearings, as the races for the outer race for both of our bearings are pre-installed inside of our rotor, and the old bearings are worn already to match the races that are in your old hubs. So if you try to put those in here, it could potentially cause them to prematurely wear because they're not matched. Being able to use a new set of bearings with new races is going to allow them to break in and properly wear with each other. This bearing kit's going to come with everything you'll need to complete one axle. That's two hubs, one for each side of our axle. We're only showing you one side of it here, but you do get twice as much as you'll see here. You've got your inner bearing, your outer bearing, your grease seal, as well as new lug nuts that work with 9/16 diameter lugs. This is for an 8 lug setup, so you are going to get 16 lugs with it. These bearings are going to make great replacements for your factory bearings if you have any damage to them. That typically occurs if the bearings get moisture down inside the caps, your grease seals leaks and it lets moisture in, or the grease seal leaks and the grease gets out. That can all cause to premature bearing wear. When you pull your bearings out and you inspect them to see if they needed to be replaced, you're going to be looking for pitting. Now, our bearings here were in pretty good shape. We had removed these old bearings here from our trailer, and I inspected them, and they looked like they were pretty decent shape. But we needed to replace our old bearings here to get our new disc brake setup up and running, because we were originally removing a drum brake setup. If you're switching over from a drum to a disc brake setup, a lot of times you will need to change your bearings to make sure that the bearings match both the new rotor as well as the spindle on your axle. In your kit, the bearing sizes that you'll receive is a 0 to 475, and you can see that written here on the back of the bearing. And it's important that you know where the numbers are, because whenever you're replacing your bearings, you'll want to inspect your old bearings to verify the numbers. For our inner bearing, you can see here it is a 22580. You'll receive 2 inners, 2 outers, and again we talked about the lug nuts as well as the seals. Our seal that comes in our kit is going to be a GS2250DL. Now this grease seal here is a 2 1/4 inch inner diameter, which is the most common size grease seal that you're going to find on your 7,000 and 8,000 pound axles. If you do have a 6,000 pound axle, however, sometimes it is a 2 1/4 and sometimes it may be a 2 1/8 inch inner diameter. So you will want to double check that part number for your grease seal, and you can see it's written on here. The one on your trailer is going to be written on there as well. Now when you go to replace your bearings, you always want to double check the numbers on your bearings to make sure you're getting the appropriate ones that you need, as we've got many different kits available here at etrailer.com with various bearing sizes, seals, and races. The easiest way to check it is to just check your outer bearing. In most cases, you'll be able to use your outer bearing number to determine which kit that you'll need, and that way you don't have to take the whole assembly off. You can just take your cap off here, take your nut off. You can wipe this bearing off on the inside, read your numbers, and then just put it back together. The only time you really need to go dig deeper on those is if you have the smaller axles, those 6,000 pounds, so you can check your grease seal and things like that. Now that we've gone over some of the features of our bearings, why you would want to replace them, and proper maintenance, we're going to go ahead and show you how to remove an old setup and install a new one, as well as greasing the bearings, getting that on. We are going to be taking our disc brake here, removing a drum, and putting a disc brake in its place. Now before we can put our new disc brake rotor on here, we have to have bearings put in it. And we don't want to reuse our old bearings. The old ones could potentially be damaged. They may not be the right size. You want to make sure you've got the proper bearings to match your components. If we look at the back side of the inner race on our bearings, we'll have part number information on there. So you'll want to take the old bearings that you had removed from your old brake system, clean up one of those and get an idea of what the numbers are on it so you can ensure that you know the specs of that bearing. Because what this is going to provide your old bearing is going to give you the inside diameter that we need to fit onto our axle spindle. The outside diameter that matches your new brakes you'll be able to find in the information on our website, so you can ensure that you've got the appropriate bearing that's going to match both your axle as well as your new brake assembly. To be safe, it's a good idea to check your bearings on one of your wheels before placing your order, so that way you can ensure you get the correct bearings, because nothing sucks more than getting in here to do the brake full job install just to find out you've got the wrong parts and you've ripped everything apart and you can't go back together. So I do recommend just taking one off, because you can always put that one back together after you take it off, but you can get the proper numbers to ensure you get the proper parts. We'll now need to pack our bearings. We do have bearing packers available here at etrailer.com, but I'll show you how you can do it by hand. The big thing we need to do is we need to get grease packed all the way inside here until it comes out the other side there. We're going to take our grease and we're going to smush it in all the way around. Some people do get irritated with various chemicals and grease, so if you think you have sensitive skin and you're worried about it, I would recommend wearing a pair of gloves. I haven't noticed any issues with mine, but all people are different, so you'll just need to make sure you're doing what's proper for you. And first I'm just going to start by kind of just getting it around there, because then we're going to be smushing it up inside there. I'm just going to get it started all the way around. And now the easiest way to usually do this is to use the palm of your hand. I'm going to put some grease there, and we're just going to smash that grease up inside of it. Just continually smash it. If you need to, you can go a little higher. And we're just going to continue doing this until we get grease all the way around the outside. We don't want to have our bearings run dry ever. So this is pretty critical to ensure that when we drive our vehicle, we have the proper lubrication inside of our bearings. If you don't, it could potentially eat it up. So here you can see that the grease that I've been pushing through on the back side is starting to come out around the seal here at the top. And that's what we want. We want it to be completely packed all the way around. Once you've got the larger bearing done, this is going to be your inner bearing. This one's going to set into the back side of your rotor, and we'll put our seal on to put that in. Since I'm all messy right now, might as well take the opportunity to grease your outer bearing. Just once you're done with this one, you want to make sure you set it in a place where it's not going to collect a bunch of dirt while you're finishing up. Now we can put our grease seal in. This is just going to sit right in the back. This is the inside here, so it's going to go towards our bearing. You can see the little spring there. Make sure your spring is in the lip all the way around. It should be when you pull it out. And we're just going to set that in place. And then we're going to drive it in using a seal driver kit. You can get that here at etrailer.com. If you don't have a seal driver kit, one of the common methods is to just use a block of wood, but I'll show you here why this is not going to necessarily work out in this particular situation. We can start with it for sure, like you would any other seal, because this is a very common automotive practice, just to use the block of wood, because most commonly you drive these seals in until they're flush with the back of the rotor. But with this particular Kodiak kit, one of the things you're going to notice here is that it's chamfered, and our seal's actually not driven all the way in yet. I know most of the time it's tilts flush, but I'm telling you that this is going to have your seal be out just a little bit, and it's not going to ride where you would think it would on the inner seal where it goes on the spindle. And it's also not driven all the way in, so it could potentially work itself out because we don't have as much surface area as possible holding the seal in. We can then take a seal driver, and this is our shop's kit, so it's a little bit different than what we have online, but it works very similarly. We're going to get an appropriate sized driver, line it up with the race. It needs to be basically the same diameter or just a hair smaller, and then we can finish driving it in all the way. And now that we've got it all the way in, you can see we're down flush with that chamfer all the way around. I know some people might get concerned, well, hey, is this going to push it in far enough to where it's going to hit our bearing? No, it's not. You can see the bearing still has plenty of room, so that's exactly how we want it there. We're then just going to smear a little bit of fresh grease on here just to make things slide on a little bit easier. All right, at this point we can lift our rotor up. It is heavy. It's a pretty big chunk of metal there, and then we're going to carefully slide it onto the spindle, being careful not to nick the grease seal that we put in on anything. So we're just gonna bring it up. I like to rotate it around. Kind of watch what I'm doing as I go in. And push it in until it stops there. We can then take the new bearing that we already greased and slide that into place. Sometimes these can be a little tricky. That's why we greased it up first to try to make things a little bit easier, but every now and then they just like to get stuck when they're cocked just a little bit. Sometimes that's the case. You can just pull it back out a little bit if it does get stuck. Once you've got the bearing slid in, we can take the old washer that we had. We're just going to wipe the grease off of that. Now the grease that we did use, we used red wheel bearing grease, which we have available here at etrailer.com if you need some. We chose red because that's what the old grease was. I know it kind of looks black. That's just because it's dirty. It was actually red once you kind of get down inside of it. So it's best to match the type that you had in there before. We'll then slide the washer on and follow it up with the nut that we had removed as well. We're going to just wipe off some of that old grease and dirt, just get that out of there. You don't need to get 100% of the old grease out of there. It's not really necessary, but we just want to get kind of the bulk off of it. And then we're just going to tighten this back on here. And we're just using that same pair of channel locks again to tighten it down. This is where we need to set the pressure on the bearings. So one of the things I like to do first to ensure the bearings are fully seated is tighten it as tight as I can get. So we're turning the nut and we're turning the rotor at the same time, and you're going to feel the rotor get tight as you do this. Again, we're just trying to make sure we got the bearings fully seated. Once you've got it nice and snug like that, really hard to turn. We don't want to leave it that way. We'll burn our bearings up, but we know they're fully seated now. Once we've got it fully tightened, we're then just going to back the nut off to where it's loose, and we're going to come back until we just feel just a little bit of resistance there, right there. That's about where we start to feel a little pressure. Now we'll see our little hole there. That's where our cotter pin's going to go back in. Since it's very close to this slot, we're just going to give it just a smidge like that, and then reinsert our cotter pin.
Welcome back, cotter pin.
Again, this is going to probably need just a little bit of adjustment on the nut to get her to go where we need it to go. There we go. Till it comes out the other side. Make sure we go all the way down with it. There we go. We got it all the way down. We'll take the other end and bend it back up like it was before. Now we can finish greasing these up. We have our grease fitting for our Easy Lube axles, and this kit's designed for our Easy Lube as it's got a cap with an opening. So we could put this on and open that up there, but I like to do this first. That's the little rubber that lets you access this. It's really more for maintenance in the future. If you don't have Easy Lube axles, you would have wanted to ensure that this was filled with grease before putting it on. So we're just going to start filling her up now with grease until we see grease squish out of our outer bearing. This can take quite a bit sometimes, depending on the spindle and rotor combination and how much space is in there to fill up. And it's just starting to ooze out now. We can see it's oozed out all the way around. So we are done filling this one up. We can then go ahead and put the cap on, seal this grease up so we're not making a mess when we go to put our caliper on here in a minute. So just line these up and thread it on. Now there is a torque specification written on the cap here. However, most people aren't going to have a socket that is large enough to fit on this. And the big thing with this is just keeping the grease from coming out. There's a rubber seal here on the inside. So as long as we get it snug, we're going to be plenty fine there. The big thing with these really is just not to over tighten it, because it is just plastic. When we first started this job, you saw the ones that were broken off because those were over tightened. And that's plenty fine right there. We're snug. Our seal is made full contact all the way around, so our grease can't come out. We now got the caliper that comes in our kit here. Want to make sure that brake pad's pushed all the way in. A lot of times in shipping it kind of just pops out of there. Just push that in. The slides here also sometimes are pushed towards the center, and we need those to be flush. So if they are pushed in, push on those slides. Same thing with the one over here on the other side. Just push it until it's flush, just to make sure that we've got enough clearance for this to go on. We can then slide our bolts in, and they are sticking through there a little bit. We're just going to pull them back because they're going to be in the way. We'll then just take our caliper, we're going to slide it over our rotor. Each side should sit nice and flush here with our bracket, and then we can take the bolts that we had slid in there and thread those in. And then we're just going to thread these in. I like to start each one by hand before tightening them down, because sometimes when you go to tighten them down, it might not be quite lined up and you'll fight getting the other one started. We can then go back and tighten them down. Now that we got them started, we're tightening them down using a 1/2 inch socket. We can then go back and torque these bolts to the specifications found in our instructions. We can now repeat this same process for the remaining hubs that we have. And once you've got those on, the nut where we put that cotter pin in and everything, that when we loosen it and tighten it back up, that for the most part gets you set where you want, but it's a good idea after you've got all of them done, you can throw a wheel on here real quick and just see if you've got any play in the wheel. If you've got a lot of play, you may need to go a little bit tighter. Just a tiny little smidgen of play is okay, but only just a little tiny bit. We don't want to over tighten it though to the point where it's too tight and this is hard to spin. That's going to remove any play, but again, this has to be loose enough to keep our bearings from burning up. So just a smidgen of play to no play is right where you want to be. If you're concerned that you maybe got it too tight, loosen it up a little bit till you feel that play, and then just go back up till you can get that cotter pin lined up. Now we've got these assemblies installed, you just got to hook up your brake lines, your hoses, and then bleed the brakes. If you're replacing an existing set, you've already got that done, and you just hook them up and bleed them. If you need to add brake lines and an actuator, if you're going from an old electric system to a hydraulic system like we are here, then I would highly recommend Hydrostar's 1600 PSI brake actuator, and they also have brake line kits available here at etrailer.com in various lengths for the amount of axles you have and the length of your trailer. And that completes our look at eTrailer's bearing kit for 13-inch rotors with an 8 on 6.5 bolt pattern on our 2019 CrossRoads Redwood.